Hi everybody, it's Peter Schiff. It is Monday, April 25th, 2011. Over the weekend, there were all sorts of news stories about the soaring costs of gasoline, $4 gas, maybe going to $5 gas, how this would be a problem for President Obama, how it was a problem for the economy. Of course, none of the coverage focused in on the cause of rising gasoline prices, which are, or is, the Federal Reserve monetizing government debt, quantitative easing. The Federal Reserve is printing a lot of money to buy up treasuries. And so rather than Americans paying for government with higher taxes, we're paying for government with more expensive gas, with more expensive food. And of course, it's not just the United States that's printing too much money, it's central banks all around the world. So everybody is paying more. It's just that the dollar price of oil is rising faster than the Australian dollar price or the Swiss franc price or the euro price, because our Federal Reserve is being even more reckless than Federal Reserve banks in other countries. But what I would have liked to have seen was a news story about the record low gasoline price. Not the record high, but the record low. Because as the price of silver is rising, it almost hit $50 an ounce today before getting some profit taking, but it's around $47 an ounce. If you think about what's happening to oil prices in terms of silver, they're plunging, not rising. And in fact, silver was money. According to the Constitution, gold and silver is money. And at one point, the U.S. Congress followed the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, and actually coined gold and silver. And when most Americans bought gasoline, they used the change in their pockets, which was silver. Back from 1920 to 1970, oil prices averaged about 25 cents a gallon. They fluctuated between 20 cents a gallon and 30 cents a gallon. It wasn't until 1970s that oil prices really started to rise. And why did that happen? Well, in 1971, we left the gold standard, we printed a bunch of money, and our money lost value, and prices responded by rising, including gasoline prices. That's exactly what's happening now. Now, the record low price for gasoline was in 1931. Gas went down to 17 cents a gallon during the Depression. You know what? It's actually cheaper now. A dime that was minted before 1965 is worth close to $5. You could buy a gallon of gasoline now for what? If it's $4, it's about 8 cents, provided you have a dime minted before 1965. And of course, all the people who were buying gasoline in the 1920s and 1930s and 1940s, 50s had those dimes. We don't have them anymore because we're printing funny money. So are gas prices rising or falling? Well, it depends on your frame of reference. If you have honest money, if you have a real dime, then gas prices are falling. They've never been this cheap. If you have paper money printed by the Federal Reserve, well, gas prices are rising. But that's because we have a fiat currency that's losing value. And if you remember, I guess back in the 1950s or 40s, when you bought gasoline for 25 cents a gallon, it's not a total fair comparison because back then you had full service. So when you bought your gasoline, they checked the tire pressure, they checked your oil, they washed your windows. They did all sorts of stuff for you that we don't do today. So, back then, if they had self-service, the prices probably would have been lower. So maybe today's 10 cents is not, as significant, but I still think it's a record low. And of course, today, the reason that, we don't have all the full service stations is, the minimum wage law destroyed all those employment opportunities. And so now, kids don't have jobs. And older Americans are, getting out of their cars in the rain to pump their own gas. But of course, that is a subject for another video blog. In fact, I think I did a couple of video blogs on how minimum wage laws and other laws destroy employment opportunities. But the point is that the headlines are wrong. Instead of focusing on record high oil prices or gas prices, they should be focusing on record low gas prices. Because for people who have real money, prices are at a record low. It's only people who have the money the Federal Reserve is printing that prices are going up. And there are a lot of people out there that are calling for deflation. They got it half right. There is deflation in terms of real money. If you've got real silver coins, whether they're dimes, quarters, half dollars, silver dollars, For you, you're experiencing deflation in that prices are falling across the board for everything that you want to buy. However, if you don't have real money, if you have Federal Reserve notes, if you have paper dollars, then you're experiencing inflation because for you, the price of everything is going up. I guess unless you're Ben Bernanke at the Federal Reserve, because according to him, there's no inflation. Now, he's going to be speaking in front of Congress, I think today, maybe he already did, and tomorrow he's giving a press conference on Wednesday. That'll be very interesting. Hopefully somebody will ask him some difficult questions and follow up, but I doubt it. Now, I also wanted to touch upon one other subject on this video blog, and that was the story came out today by the IMF, and where the IMF is now saying that China will surpass the U.S. economy to be the world's largest economy by 2016. That's in 5 years. And that's much sooner than the traditional or the conventional wisdom has been by other experts. Now, I wrote an article a couple years ago in which I argued that before the end of this decade, China would overtake the U.S. as the world's largest economy. And now the IMF is pretty much coming to that same conclusion, and for the same reason. You see, what other nations, what other economists fail to look at or fail to factor in is exchange rates. They've assumed that the RMB and the dollar will stay at the same rate that they are today. Well, I believe that sometime over the next several years, you will see a substantial revaluation of the Chinese RMB, where the Chinese currency will rise sharply. And when that happens, that changes the way you measure GDP. If the Chinese currency doubles in value against the dollar, then China's GDP doubles against the U.S. GDP. So when you factor in likely exchange rate appreciation, the IMF may well be correct in that China surpasses the U.S. even by 2016, which is even quicker than I thought. I thought, by the end of the decade, but certainly 2016 would meet that time frame. But one thing that I disagreed with, and you can read this article on the internet from the IMF, is one of the reasons that the IMF seems to be attributing to China's success is that America has a more free market economy and China has a more controlled command economy, and because Chinese bureaucrats are making all the right decisions, that they're engineering a stronger economy, and since America, we have free trade and laissez-faire capitalism, that's why we're falling behind. Now, this is pure propaganda. I mean, I've said this many times, that America gives capitalism a bad name, and China gives communism a good name, because they're not, China is not communist, and America is not capitalist. The truth of the matter is, the Chinese economy looks more like the American economy from 100 years ago than the American economy does today. Yes, China is not a democracy. They can't vote. There's certain political freedoms that they don't enjoy. But from an economic perspective, there is less interference and less control in the Chinese economy than there is in the American economy. We don't have a free market. We have anything but a free market. We have the U.S. government distorting every decision that we make. There are all sorts of rules and subsidies and taxes that inhibit the free market from functioning and cause assets and labor and capital to be allocated the way the government wants them to. And in addition, we have all sorts of foolish policies that are perpetuated by politicians trying to get reelected. So we do a lot of things in this country that are bad economics but are good politics. And that is part of the problem. Now, you might want to say, hey, that's one of the benefits of China is since they don't have to worry about constantly getting reelected, they can do what's right and not what's politically expedient. But the bottom line is we are losing to China because we are not free, because we don't have a capitalist economy. If we did, then this wouldn't be the case. And of course, we also have government money. We don't have sound money anymore. We have fiat money. We have interest rates that are much too low, that have been distorting decisions as well as government rules and regulations. So we have anything but a free market economy. And it's because of all the government interference in our economy. That's why we're losing ground. And the reason that China is gaining is because they have less. I'm not saying China is perfect. Far from it. They have too much government in China. It's just that they have less than we do. Remember, when the old Soviet Union, a real communist country, was around, there was no economic growth in the old Soviet Union. They couldn't even feed, they were starving. We had to give them grain credits. That's because they were a communist country in every sense of the word. That's not the case in China. And let's not try to pretend that if we simply had more government and more control, that's the way to succeed. No, the opposite. We need to dismantle all the government that we have. We need to go back to the type of economy we had 100 years ago when we had freer markets, when resources were allocated based on a competitive market, based on a profit motive, not based on political whim. Investments weren't made because there was a subsidy, because there was a government guarantee, because there was a tax deduction, and Americans were involved in productive employment. We weren't this phony service sector economy where everybody simply borrowed and spent money. We saved money because we had sound money, because we didn't have a tax code that punished people for spending, and we didn't have this gigantic social welfare state. Remember, we didn't have Social Security, we didn't have Medicare, Medicaid, and all these government programs that we think are so great. China doesn't have any of these programs, and that's why China is succeeding. It's not because they have too much government, but because they have less than the United States. Anyway, that's it for today. I'm going to be talking about this tonight on CNN, so maybe you get a chance on the Elliot Spitzer show. If you see this in time, you can watch that on CNN. Anyway, take care now, everybody. Bye-bye.